Hello and welcome to the latest webinar from FlightGlobal. Today we're focusing on Europe and the challenging issues that airlines face in rebuilding their networks at a time when there remains so much uncertainty around travel rules in the region. Travel restrictions in Europe are gradually being lifted, but at a much slower and far more disjointed way than the industry would have hoped or wished for. For Europe's airlines, this means further steps in increasing their capacity. But for many airlines, capacity remains far below the levels and the highs they enjoyed before the crisis. Against this backdrop, airlines are having to adapt their networks and strategies to take advantages of the markets which are open and where demand is strongest. Yet they must balance the requirement of finding flights that they can operate profitably with the longer term network strategies that they have. To debate these challenges and the various issues facing airlines in Reconnecting Europe, we've got a fantastic panel of experts from the industry today who are facing the challenges literally as we speak. From Latvian carrier airBaltic, I'm delighted we have the Chief Executive Martin Gauss to give us a perspective from the low-cost sector. I'm delighted that we have Chief Commercial Officer Sophie Dekkers, and to provide a perspective from a regional operator from the UK, we have Jonathan Hinkles from Scottish Regional LoganAir, and we'll be talking to our panelists very shortly. Before we do that, just a quick reminder, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of the screen. We'll try and get through as many as we can over the next 55 minutes or so. To start us off, I guess, before we get to some of those wider strategies, it'd be good to get a perspective on what's happening now, because we have our panelists are all from different operators, different segments, different parts of the world, and as we know, nothing is straightforward in these post-COVID times. Martin, perhaps I could begin with you. How difficult a journey has this been, and where is airBaltic in its recovery?
At the very beginning, it was, as nobody knew what was coming, not so difficult, I would say, because we were seeing this COVID coming and there was more and more news about it. But then we had a very tough one because we had to stop flying completely for 62 days, which was different to a lot of other airlines, so no flying at all. And then we used that time to first of all secure that we can stay. That wasn't clear because nobody knew how long it would be. And then we developed in this time a business plan for the time after, which is then, since we are we're not out of it, but since we restarted and then had the third wave coming, we are optimizing that. And the key for airBaltic is that we focus then only on that fleet, which we had chosen anyway for the future fleet, the Airbus A220, and we brought forward by 2 years the retiring of all other aircraft. So that was actually a positive one, because it gives us a much better starting position now. Then going through the crisis to today, it was a very, very hard winter, burning a lot of cash. And now I would say Latvia was a bit later than other countries in opening or releasing certain travel restrictions. We had a law saying you shouldn't travel until the end of June. So, but since then, people are really like taking the freedom to book. And we see now a lot of, especially July, August, a lot of short-term bookings coming in. But I also see that we will be still taking a while before we come back to the 2019 levels.
And so in terms of capacity, what kind of level are you expecting to fly in July, August time?
So we are flying now above 50% of what we did in 2019, and load factors currently average overall 60%, so not as high as a classical low coster would have it this time of the year. But we're operating the hub again, which means as we have a hub and spoke system and a point-to-point system depending on the country, we are satisfied with it because it is what we put into our business plan. The only worries I have, we do not see bookings coming for hardly any coming for 8 weeks and beyond into the future. Yeah? People are only booking now in the next 4, 6, 8 weeks maximum. And that is something which is worrying because we have not planned to reduce our winter program significant to what we plan to do. And therefore, we try to understand what will be the restrictions coming with this Delta variant, if at all. And then we will have to adjust the winter schedule, which we thought we are done with. We thought that a reduced winter schedule compared to 19 would be good, but at the moment we don't know. And I think nobody knows, because there's nobody who can give you a prognosis on what's coming the next 3 months.
Thank you. And Sophie, from Easyjet's perspective, whereabouts are you in that sort of journey of recovery?
Yeah, very similar to Martin in terms of forward looking. I think in terms of the journey from our Q3, which finished at the end of June, we flew about 17% of our 2019 passenger volume, so still significantly down. You know, I think we were thinking we probably have a June recovery, and that hasn't happened. And that was where we were modelling. If I look back to March, we were saying it's going to be a June recovery. Vaccination rates will be up. Infection rates will be down, and that's where we're going to be. I think the challenge is the variants and how that's knocked us for six, really, and also the government indecisiveness of opening and closing borders, and then the knock-on impact that's had across Europe as well. Where we're hoping to fly for Q4 is up to about 60% of our capacity versus FY19. So we're still, I guess, optimistic for the summer, and we're still seeing some forward bookings, but exactly as Martin said, we're seeing them in the really short near term, like 3 to 4 weeks is typically the booking window for people, whereas normally, as you know, for the summer, certainly from a UK passenger perspective, they're booking much further out. So we have very little visibility beyond September, and we're going through exactly the same conversations internally, even today, with the rest of the business. How much should we be flying for this winter? And then even looking to next summer, there's no certainty that there won't be PCR testing from a UK connection perspective. And that is a barrier for some people for travel. So we're even now looking ahead to next summer, and we're currently building next summer schedule, thinking we were building it on a recovery, but now less certain. So we're doing the whole demand curve modelling again to understand what impact there could be if there's a level of PCR testing, what if another variant comes in. It's very uncertain. So yes, at the moment, we're optimistic we're going to get some summer, and a lot of that is being driven by our European network and the flying we're doing intra-European rather than UK touching at the moment. But that's the real impact that we're seeing. And we're fortunate that we do have domestic networks in the UK, France and Italy, and we've been able to really leverage those coming into the summer. So our domestic networks coming up to around, in the UK, about 105% of what we flew in FY19, and in France it's somewhere between 120 and 140% of what we flew back in 2019 for our domestic network this summer. A lot of that's leisure, so a lot of that's new routes that we've launched for this summer, from France into Corsica, for example, into the islands, from northern France down into southern France, for example. The UK is connecting, Inverness down into Newquay. We've got Glasgow and Edinburgh into Newquay and Bournemouth and so on. So a lot more long sort of domestic leisure. It has really been the focus for us to try and mitigate some of the damage for this summer, but yeah, it's still very uncertain, unfortunately, at the moment.
And those domestic routes and that sort of slight pivot to flying more in domestic, is that just sort of a short-term thing, or do you see that you're likely to keep that going longer term, as much as anyone can look longer term?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think one good thing is we're trying things that maybe we wouldn't have tried before, because we knew the money we'd make on a UK to Spain route, and it was less known on some of these other routes that we're doing, and even some of the routes we're doing internally within Europe as well. So we are trying things now that we wouldn't normally try, and it's a good opportunity to say what's working and what might stick. You have to overlay on that, I think, demand from customers and what that is. So there's definitely a staycation focus this year. Whether that translates into next year will depend on testing and all the other barriers, I think. But it is a good opportunity to test things. So even, switching not just the domestic focus, but we've been able to switch some of our Faro new base capacity that we launched this summer that was pointed towards the UK. We're doing some Scandinavian markets, for example. So it does give us the chance to try things we wouldn't normally try. Let's see how they go. They've only just been launched, a lot of those routes. So, but if they work, we would look to continue to operate them into next summer, definitely.
Excellent. And Jonathan, for LoganAir, how's if I dare ask it, how's the pandemic been for you?
Well, we've kept flying right the way through the pandemic, and we've, we had to, given the role that we fulfil within Scotland. So I think the smallest level that we got down to was about 45% of our fleet operating, and that was a skeleton scheduled service across a lot of routes, but a lot of other things that we do as well. We do a lot of flying in the oil and gas industry. We fly for Royal Mail. We converted aircraft into air ambulances, and still have a Saab 340 operating in that role today. So we've turned our hand to do a number of different things, and that's meant that we have not faced the kind of all shut down and then how do you get things restarted again challenge that I know a number of other airlines have had. As of today, we have all of our aircraft back flying with no aircraft remaining in storage. Demand-wise, we're probably back to about 70% of where we would normally be across the network. But what we're seeing within that is that really, we've seen no international travel, of course, whether that be international visitors coming into the UK and flying domestically with us, or people from, sort of outlying points of the UK, that the communities we serve, flying off to go on holiday. That just isn't there. But there is a smaller staycation traffic level of domestic demand. And that certainly hasn't replaced what we've lost internationally, but it is helping. And it was interesting looking at the Eurocontrol figures last week. We were the only UK airline that was actually flying more last week than it was in 2019. And there are a number of reasons behind that around contract flying and some of the routes that we've taken on, those kind of things. But we're about 70% of the way back to where we want to be. But I think the big challenge now is really looking at this winter. We don't like the look of what we see. We've already exercised some flexibility that we have in the fleet to be able to take some of the largest aircraft out of our fleet over this winter. Through natural expiries of leases, and not replace those aircraft until next summer. We are going to exercise those and really batten down the hatches for this winter coming. We've got a schedule in place, but like everything, you just got to keep looking at the schedule continually and saying, is the demand there to do it? I was listening enviously there to Martin saying people booking 4 to 6 weeks ahead. I think 4 to 6 days would be about where we are at the moment. It really is incredibly short notice. And that does make network planning, how much capacity you need, very, very difficult. But I've got to say, I think our guys are doing a fantastic job of keeping very close to what's happening in their markets, and making sure that we're not flying aeroplanes when we shouldn't be. So from a financial perspective, that's been reflected very well in our results over the last few months. We've been able to avoid cash burn over the whole of last winter, which is I think unprecedented. I'm very, very, in as much as one can be pleased about anything right now, that's been a source of heartening news from the team.
And I guess, and I'll probably put this to all of you, but Jonathan, I'll start with you. How much science is there in your network planning at the moment? Is it just about what's open and where you can fly and where you can deploy capacity, or is there more you can add?
Well, predominantly LoganAir's network is domestic, and we're covering sort of all points of the UK. We have been adding a number of things. We have been sort of keeping a close eye on it. I mean, I think one of the risks that we've got through the industry at the moment is what the industry does to itself over the coming months. And I think we're certainly seeing a question of people piling capacity into domestic markets, not entirely with good effect. I was listening to some figures earlier this week for a carrier that started operating on the same route as us in one area, and it's flying 180 seat aeroplanes at 13% load factors on that route for the last 2 weeks. They're thinking, what on earth are you doing? And so, that level of, we're seeing a broad span of capacity discipline across the market. I think one low-cost carrier is playing that very well. Another low-cost carrier has got to a point where it's sort of had a bit of a wobble and is taking some judicious action. And I think another one of the low-cost carriers actually needs to take that judicious action in terms of its capacity discipline, given some of what we see they're doing. We're just looking at it thinking, okay. But from our point of view, we're just trying to chart a path through the middle of that, make sure that we're focusing on delivering the operation, which is incredibly tough going at the moment. We flew 197 flights on Monday, and by the end of the day, it felt like you dispatched every single one of them yourself, and it really is hard going with airport infrastructure not operating at full pelt, ground handling, PRM infrastructure, crew members and ground staff and engineers getting pinged with track and trace stuff. It really is very, very hard work delivering the operation right now. So we've got to make sure, as well as commercially, we've got a strong focus on all of those operational aspects and try and make sure that we deliver what we've promised to deliver to our customers, which is the main thing that it's all about.
And Sophie, maybe capacity is, it's sort of, people are chasing whatever markets are there. It is difficult out there, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And the network team keep being challenged. Are you going to do any more thinning? We keep being asked, because it's not great from a customer perspective, but we don't know what the demand is. And exactly as Jonathan said, you have very little visibility to be able to plan further out. And you want to give customers certainty, but it's so uncertain, it's really hard to do that. And at the same time, you don't want to pull stuff too soon, because from our perspective, something might go on the green list and we've already taken the capacity out and we lose out, or, so we're trying to limit how much we do change. And obviously there's slot restrictions that limit what you can do in a 3-week window in the near term anyway. But that's where we're trying to now look ahead to say, okay, well, what's early winter going to look like? What's September, October going to look like? Are we going to see an extended summer? Is Spain going to go on the Amber Plus list? What's going to happen next? And actually, it's interesting with France on the Amber Plus. We have seen quite a lot of passengers transferring out of the route, but we've also still seen new bookings. So some people can isolate and they're prepared to do that. So it is very difficult right now to make the judgment, and it has been all the way through. But we continue to, on a daily basis, I would say, rebuild the schedule, look at the new network opportunities, look what we could add. I mean, we added 57 new routes for this summer since the start of June. And normally you wouldn't be adding new routes that late in the season. And a lot of that is to try and respond to where you see those changes in demand. I think if one thing comes out of this for us, it's about being able to be much more agile with network and scheduling than we've ever been before. And I'd like to see what we could take from that longer term in a more sustainable way, rather than this kind of chaotic way, to be able to say, oh, how do we keep some of that nimble ability to act, and rather than, everything just being planned and fixed 18 months out. So trying to look at the positives, but it's so dynamic at the moment, and being able to make the right call is very difficult. But that's where we're fortunate, I think, with our network, that we do have some domestic footprint in a number of our markets. We do have the destination bases now, which is great timing to have opened Malaga and Faro this year and have moved capacity there that we can switch now, pointing it to the UK, switch it into Europe. So we're very lucky, I think, in that respect. But Jonathan's absolutely right. It's very difficult to make the right call on capacity. We're 60% for Q4. Other low-cost carriers that Jonathan alluded to are much higher, and if anything are growing, and we get challenged internally. Are we being too conservative? And it's very difficult to hit the sweet spot. We did our Q3 results on Tuesday. I think half the analysts said we were still too bullish, and half said we're too soft. On you can't win, can you? So I think so far we've sort of got the balance right, and responding quickly is the key thing, really.
And Martin, from your side for airBaltic, you don't have that large domestic market to rely on, I guess. What's it been like for you?
So we don't have the only domestic route we had, which was Liepāja, is not served at the moment, coming back later this year, maybe. And similar to Sophie, we have in the senior management team very consistent meetings every week, and had that also all the time through. And the time network planning gets in that is incredible. It has increased, and they are the number one each week. We had to employ people in that area while we had to reduce 40% of our staff to cope with the challenges they have. And a good example is our airline would have discussed before the pandemic Riga hub, of course, serving as much routes from the hub as possible, and then we fly Tallinn and Vilnius direct point-to-point routes, and there you would say, okay, let's add something Amsterdam or Copenhagen. You know what happened? We had to open a Malaga because of the demand, a Tallinn Malaga, and what then happened was none of these Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Frankfurts did anything, but we had to, this has never happened, we had to do a second weekly Tallinn Malaga because of the demand. And that is something nobody could have forecast. And this is now happening, as Sophie says, like we do it within 5 days from not knowing that we would serve that route and open it. That is sometimes how the demand jumps. And what is traditionally there, the big hubs, which and a lot of the traffic we do is serving our codeshare partners in the big hubs. But as the US, for example, is not functioning, so that traffic does not exist. And how to go into the future, network planning department in our company has also taken a big learning, similar to Easyjet, and we will also take these learnings into the future. And I guess we will be all much more flexible and doing things much faster, not in this traditional way where you have the slot conference every half year doing this. I think every airline is going to be very, very fast in adjusting also in the future, which will help because I think we will match much better the demand to the capacities we have. Yeah. So I hope, because that was the positive thing I see, but it's not at all what we used to be.
And I was very struck, I was listening to Willie Walsh a couple of weeks ago, who was talking about, you know, one of the challenges airlines are going to face, you know, as they're trying to restore their balance sheets, get themselves back to a profitable basis, is how risk averse or how much risk they can afford to take, but they're going to have to take a more conservative approach towards those route opportunities. Martin, perhaps how can you balance here's a route I can fly today and make some money on, against here's a route I know we need to be in, and I know in a year, or 2 years, or whenever the new norm comes, it's going to be profitable for me, and I want to be a leader in this. How do you balance those two?
So we are very happy that we have a model where we are not only relying on individual points. I'm very happy that we have the hub, because especially in this time, we can open a route, and then if you take half, we used to have 50% transfer traffic and 50% point-to-point overall. Now it's less, it's 30% transfer because there is not so much. But we look at the route and then we say, okay, we had all of them before, so we just start them again, and we look at, can we fly at least 30% load factor, which is in our case the number where we are not burning any money by flying. And once that is possible, then we look at it and we start increasing frequency. So that's what we're doing now. And in the same way, when we cannot serve these routes anymore because maybe seasonality doesn't support it, we are taking it gradually out. That works for us. So we have been able now to go up to 80 destinations again from the 3 countries. And we can go further up. There's enough points we can connect. But without, if we would not have had the hub function in Riga, it would have been difficult just because of the demand. We would have a lot less point-to-point flying than we have now. So we go into the future and we'll make sure that we are not flying flights where we lose cash. When you talk about the profitability of the route, on a lot of routes that will take a while. So we of course we have some routes which work already very well, but a lot of routes will take quite a while before they are back in profit.
And Sophie, from Easyjet's perspective, again, how do you balance that longer term market positioning against can we make money?
Yeah, no, exactly. And one of our core principles all the way through is to try and only operate flying that's positively contributing in terms of cash flow, which is why we have been at 17% and why we're switching to 60% now, up to 60% now for our summer period. And I think the critical thing is to not lose sight of your core strategy, because if you get distracted in a moment like this, then you could lose the fundamentals of what the basis of the airline has been built. So ours is number 1, number 2 positions in primary airports. If we suddenly got distracted by niche opportunities and let that guide our network planning, then we're going to lose the fundamentals of what made us a successful airline. So underpinning it is about protecting the slots in those primary airports, and that will continue. I think one of the critical things we've got now that was 2 things really. One is destination bases that we opened. So we had already got Palma established, and having Faro and Malaga opening this year has given us that flexibility that I talked about, where you can move capacity more easily to where the customer demand is, rather than having it based at the source market, having it based at the destination. And I think the other thing that's changed for us in the last 12 months is bringing a number of crew into seasonal contracts. Because actually, historically, when we looked at network planning, you would look at routes that would be profitable year round. Or now we can take maybe a slightly different view and build on top of the profitable year-round flying, look at kind of peak summer flying and where there are new opportunities there that perhaps we wouldn't have done previously because the aircraft, we would have been carrying the cost of the crew in the aircraft in the winter. So that's something slightly different, I think, coming out of this that will enable us to try some different things. But I think fundamentally, we've got to stick to the core and not get distracted by that, because this is a moment in time, and yes, it is an extended moment in time, but we will come through this. And 2023 and beyond, we want to be back to that core strategy and building on the network position that we built.
And Jonathan, from LoganAir's perspective, in terms of that balance between strategic and opportunities, I mean, have you been surprised at opportunities that have come up for you? Have you got onto routes into markets that you wouldn't have expected to be on?
Well, I think first and foremost, when people use the word strategic in the airline industry, it's normally a euphemism for loss making, isn't it? Because you either have good routes and they're good routes, or you have strategic routes and they're loss making. And as everybody uses that one to cover a multitude of sins. I mean, from our perspective, the cash burn's been been front and center. We've been making sure that we've not been flying things that haven't, and having to just sort of cut our cloth according to that. And that maybe means on multiple frequency routes where you'd normally be doing 4 flights a day, you're doing 2, maybe 3 on a Monday and a Friday. And you're just progressively trying to build it back very, very slowly as you see the demand coming. But I was joking a while ago with our network team, with the late bookings coming in, it's like this sort of Kevin Costner approach to route planning, as I call it. We sort of build it and people will come, fly it and people will book. And there's been a bit of that. I think the other thing for us that's been really, really important has been the strength within LoganAir's business from other things that we do outside of the scheduled network. So the contract flying that we have, the mail flying that we do, the other sources of income that we've gone, and that's been incredibly helpful to us. That is something that we've taken a decision in the last sort of short while to build further on, to make sure that we've got a good mix of business. And that's not in a way that some people would do it by having a geographical spread. It's by having a spread across sectors. We've got the infrastructure to be an airline, 24/7 ops, engineering, everything you need to do that. What else can we do with that? And that alternative flying has been hugely helpful to us. And that's something that we're looking to hang on to the gains that we've made there, and indeed build on them over the next short while. So our opportunities have kind of come in a subtly different way, I would say, to those of a purist scheduled service, which of course is still the lion's share of our business and will remain so. But it's given us real opportunity to kind of have a think about that. And where we have made gains in that to try and build on those, and that's whether that's through ambulance flying, all sorts of other things that we do, and that's really has given us a good, strong financial bedrock over the course of the last since really we knew we were going to have to go through another winter last winter with the pandemic. That was a huge strength to us.
And you've all touched upon this sort of changed extremely short window booking pattern from passengers. Martin, perhaps I could ask you, how do you think what challenges have you got in persuading people to book, and in what way has the market changed? Are your passengers different, and how do you see that being, is that just a short-term thing, or do you think it's changed over a longer period? That's about 8 questions in one. Just pick one of them.
So it is short-term if we look at the pandemic, and it will be probably as long as we have it to this extent. But we see in the US that if restrictions are lifted, people go back to normal. And I would say that also everybody said this Zoom and Teams and all these meetings would be taking that business travel away. I don't believe that, because we all see the limits of it, and there will be enough opportunities for people, even new businesses, who need to visit each other, and so that will come back as well. But that is the biggest change now, the business travelers. Funny enough, now we have in business class a lot more passengers than before, because passengers travel for leisure. are now saying that has to do with all sorts of personal wishes. I'm booking a business class seat, which is very nice. Yeah, so we see that, and I hope that stays. So because that is very attractive. But the behavior is that people at the moment are not booking long term, so they don't trust. The passengers do not trust the different governments of making it possible to travel. Business travel, I guess, all the corporations make it difficult with their internal rules that you can just travel as an employee as you used to. So will it be long term? No, because our industry will recover. We will be having more passengers than we had in 2019. But I think we all learned now that this is not a thing which is over in 1 year. It just will take longer. And especially looking at long-haul carriers, I think they will see when other continents are not opening that the recovery for the long-haul flying will take significantly longer. But I'm sure we will have more passengers in Europe earlier than we think today, because once it's over, people will then say, okay, and now I'm doing it 2 times, 3 times because I want to enjoy my freedom to go from A to B. But now it's not really a freedom if you're then on a beach and suddenly that government says you're running around in a mask while you thought you have a summer holiday, then you better stay at home. And that you have also here in Latvia. Why would you go somewhere when Latvia has 32 degrees and the nicest beaches in Europe? Because I have to say we have 512 kilometers of beach and beautiful nature. So I cannot really say fly to Greece right now when I have in Latvia the best weather.
And Sophie, I think Easyjet's really is really interesting because it plays across all these different markets, and as you say, you've got it, which is, I guess, you arguably you're equally cursed and blessed there, aren't you? Because you've got lots of opportunities and places you can direct, but you must have more changes and more travel requirements to deal with than anyone, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's very difficult to judge. And I think, if I was just looking at some numbers I had here on how our route sort of mix has changed for this summer. So this summer, 30% of our flying is on city to city routes, and normally it's about 49%. And whereas domestics, we're at 31% this summer, and we're normally at 20%. So we've up-weighted domestics, down-weighted city, and beaches at around 37%, and used to be normally is around 30%. So we've increased beach as well. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges, certainly in the near term, which builds on sort of Martin's point around business travel, but is the city to city, those short breaks are really sort of off the table at the moment with the amount of testing and changing regulations and everything else that's in place. City flying, city breaks that normally are part of our core model just aren't there. What we're seeing is a switch towards much more leisure and beach travel, and we probably expect to see that certainly sort of in the short near term and probably into next summer as well. So it's great that we launched Easyjet Holidays, because that's perfect timing to be able to capitalize on that much more shift towards longer leisure breaks, because if people have to jump through all these hoops for testing and so on, they're going to want to they're only going to do that if they're going for a week, 2 weeks, 10 days, that sort of length of time. So I think that's one of the behavioural shifts we've seen, and we've moved the network to adjust to that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we're not just looking at UK international green, amber, red. There are various lists between Germany and Portugal, France and Italy. Every country has a different list, and depending on when another country opens might mean another country decides to close. So it's very difficult to judge, because we opened up some of the green list routes that now Malta, for example, are saying that if you're over 12, you have to be double vaccinated. In the UK, we're not vaccinating children under 18. So now for a load of families that have booked for this hot summer thinking it was green list, it's not actually green list for them. And it's that complexity and that changing dynamism is making it very challenging. But yes, that's the sort of profile of our network that's shifted for this year. And I think probably into next year, it's going to look more similar to that until PCR testing is removed completely, because at the moment that is a barrier to short breaks.
And Jonathan, I mean, a lot of your routes are in the UK, but I suspect you're going to tell me that doesn't make the operational side of it much easier.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a fascinating network and a fascinating challenge in LoganAir, and we started flying to Heathrow over the course of the pandemic, and we've now got sort of 5 flights a day in and out of Heathrow, yet we're still operating in and out of the small North Isles in Orkney as well. So it's a real span from one end of the spectrum to the other. I think from a customer point of view, there is still a level of reassurance required very much by the customer before committing to book. And we're also seeing customers sort of taking time to double check absolutely every single last aspect of their journey before they're setting off on it, which is creating some particular challenges in terms of servicing that demand for reassurance, if you like, from our customers. But that's something that we're kind of doing, I think, as well as we possibly can, working our way through that. And I think that will probably stay. In terms of what we need to do with individual customers around their journey. But we also took a decision very quickly on when the whole national discussion about face coverings was all kicking off about 2 weeks ago, saying, no, we are keeping them on our flights. I think a policy that says, well, you put them on when you cross Hadrian's Wall at 25,000 feet going south, or take them off at this point is just not going to work. And when we restart services to Cardiff in about 10 days' time, we will be serving all 4 of the nations in the UK, each of which has got a subtly different policy. So there's no way when you're flying between them and across them that you can make that in common sense out of it. So we just said, look, we were the first airline in the UK to mandate wearing face coverings in the beginning of the pandemic. We're going to keep this policy in place and actually provide reassurance to customers on that, because that's been one of the big things coming back through the travel confidence surveys, that people do want to see that they are still going to be safe, and they perceive, what you think of it medically is a different issue, they perceive that actually is a good step from a personal health and safety perspective. So we have kept that mandate across the whole network, and I'm really pleased looking at the mess that's going on out there nationally, that we actually just said right from the beginning, no, here's what we're going to do. And we've mandated that through our conditions of carriage for each and every customer. And
I'm going to take one of the audience questions, which is for you, Martin. You'd be glad to know. Martin believes that capacity will return to 2019. Believes that capacity will return to 2019 levels, and from a personal perspective, this is likely, but do you really think that business travel will return to pre-COVID levels? And obviously, Sophie, Jonathan, if you've got a view on that, feel free to chime in.
Yes, I will believe it. I believe it comes back, business travel, but there will be different business travel. There's different generations coming for different reasons doing business, and there's certain business travel which will be done online for years and years to come, and there will be new technologies coming, but there will be people to do business, whatever that means. Yeah, maybe we'll see more people being entrepreneurs, the younger generation. A lot of people now, they do their own business, and they require to meet in person. If you see all the startups now, they need to meet. There's a culture of meeting with each other, and we are in Europe, right? So a lot of Europe is not as developed as, for example, the US from traffic point of view. We're in the Baltics here. We don't even have a train system connecting to Europe yet. Will take another 10 years. Road system is also not. So there will be a lot of flying, and business-orientated flying will be above the 2019 levels. I cannot say when, but yeah, total passengers, I would say we are back in 2022. If that forced wave is not taking too long, then we should see to 2019 levels in 22. Business travel will return also above the levels of 19.
And Sophie, Jonathan, either of you want to hazard a guess on business travel?
Yeah, I think from us, it's the profile of who a business passenger is that's changing. So we've even seen all the way through the pandemic, construction workers, construction hasn't shut, it's continued. Particularly some of our Belfast routes into London have been very strong from a construction travel perspective. So what you think of, I think, maybe in your traditional mindset of what a business traveller looks like, isn't the case anymore. And actually a business traveller is exactly as Martin said, it's the SMEs, it's the entrepreneurs, but it's construction, it's work that can't be done virtually, and that will continue. And I think certainly for short haul, it's still a very effective way of conducting business. I think maybe there's a question around ultra long haul, whether actually people will say it's worth going across the world to do a meeting and where we can do that effectively. But for short haul, where it isn't a big time compromise, I think that will bounce back. And what we found, I mean, again, being fortunate with our network, having that city to city primary airport route map means that we do benefit when business recovers. And we saw it in, previously in the recessions where businesses and corporates shift away from legacy into low cost, where there isn't a compromise on routes from point to point travel perspective. So we do see it coming back. Yes, it'll probably take some time, particularly, I can't even get colleagues at the moment of mine who are based in Europe to come in because they're fully vaccinated in Europe, but we don't recognise it on the borders. So they can't come into the meetings that we've got here, which is very frustrating. They're having to work remotely when they work for an airline. But that's one of our challenges right now is the sooner the British government recognise the European vaccination certificate, the better, because there is a need for some business travel, and I think that will come back as well.
And Jonathan, anything from you on business travel?
Yeah, we don't see it coming back at a full pelt level. We think there has been a structural change in some aspects of it, particularly in things like financial audits and advisory, that kind of sector. I mean, we've just gone through the second end of year audit now without a face-to-face meeting with our auditors. And, that was unthinkable before. And I don't see that. I don't see that going back to the way it was. I mean, I think the good thing is that pretty much every Zoom or Teams call you have has got some technical problems on it at some point or another. So there's hope for airlines yet, I would say, through that. But I think our strength will be around offering frequency within the markets that we cover, because I think people are more reticent. There's been a work-life balance shift for people working from home. And I think gone are the days where you have people who used to pack their bags on a Sunday night and be off on Monday morning and travelling around the country to get back home on Friday night again if they were lucky. I don't see people having had the time at home that they now have going back to that. So I think the business travel trips will probably be shorter in duration and a balancing act of Teams calls. And that will rely on frequency and network coverage, which we're able to offer with the size of aircraft that we have in LoganAir in the UK domestic market very viably. And we're already seeing that coming through in terms of how we're performing on some of the routes. We've sort of, where we have seen competition in some of the markets, we've been maintaining load factors. Some of the figures we're looking at for June, sort of 71% load factor in one market, and a major carrier flying against us, 31% load factor in exactly the same market. And again, it's, so that flexibility to us is very, very important of being able to match frequency and capacity to where we think the demand will be, and to maintain the demand by having that frequency. It's a kind of virtuous circle if we get it right, and we're seeing the benefits of that across quite a few of our markets.
Yeah, but I think this is a fascinating area and this is probably where you get into, network strategies as much as anyone can have a strategy, is to what extent it's about building back the network to keep the points there, and to what extent it becomes around frequency and so forth. So from the low cost perspective, how much for you, I mean, this initial period, I guess it is about just flying as much as the bits you can as profitably as you can. But as it starts to build back further, how much do you see it being about building back capacity, not frequency, ahead of adding new routes, adding network breadth?
Yeah, I think whilst we still have a smaller fleet than we had in 2019, the focus will be on consolidating on existing capacity and making sure that we are building back, particularly on the primary airports, that slot position, and making sure we're not losing ground on that. So I would say there is certainly it's more around frequency and building up what we had than going for brand new, very exciting, very different things, because we know that the capacity worked. Historically, we've only had to reduce it because we've had to reduce the fleet size. So I think, that would be our primary objective, is to build back that capacity. Certainly where we've seen legacy carriers coming out of some of the markets and slots becoming available at some of the primary airports within Europe because of EU legislation, because of the funding, for certain airlines and things like that have happened, that will be a big focus for us. And then, yes, we always want to try new and exciting things, because that's what customers want, and that's what gets them excited as well. But I would say the predominant focus, 80% of the focus, is going to be on building back our existing route network, and then 20% will be about investing in new opportunities where we can see those.
And then Martin, from airBaltic's perspective, are you looking just to get as many, initially as many points back on the network and then worry about frequency, or is frequency more important for you?
We do both as demand comes. For example, we are limited at the moment on the Moscow route that's full every day because we can only fly 4 instead of 12 times a week due to political restrictions there. But we will look at both. So we want to connect all the points to the hub because that worked. That was the backbone. And then we want to go, of course, go where we had high frequency flying. We add the frequency as the demand comes back. We will in between look for points which we haven't served if they make sense. But that's mainly, we cover already all business capitals in Europe, so it can then only be leisure destinations. And there, of course, you have only a seasonal demand depending on the destination, where we will take the opportunity to fly something for 2-3 months, but then stop it again. Yeah, so we'll do both, but we want, similar to Easyjet, to ensure that our existing markets are served again, and then the capacity comes as the demand returns.
And this ties in with a couple of the questions that we've had, and I almost hesitate to ask this because I kind of know what the answer is going to be. How, as airlines are looking to add capacity, as the markets are opening up, how ready do you think the infrastructure is to support that over the rest of the summer, in terms of, can the airports handle it? Are the processes in place? Are you worried about lengthy queues at airports, of how passengers are going to react to it? Martin, do you have confidence that if you add the capacity, the experience is going to be okay at airports on that travel journey?
We have that experience that we are not satisfied with the punctuality figures, and that is mainly due to lack of staff at different airports at different times of the day, and that is because they cannot ramp up as fast as we sometimes do. So therefore we see now, it used to be air traffic control the biggest issue, now it seems to be at airports. Not in general, there's airports where there's no problem at all, especially the big ones, but then there's smaller airports, they just do not have the staff, or they didn't bring it back as fast, the handlers, and that we see. But I think it will not get worse than it is right now. Yeah, so we'll not get into a situation like in 2019 because overall capacities are still lower. But individual airports are an issue in peak times.
And Sophie, is that a similar concern for you? And how upbeat are you that if you get to 60% capacity in August, the infrastructure keeps up?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge. I think the biggest challenge at the moment is the pingdemic, isn't it? And the amount of people being told to self-isolate, and what that impact that has, because we can't measure that. But certainly what we've seen so far, I don't know sort of Jonathan's perspective on Heathrow, because we don't operate there, but what we've seen so far in the other UK airports is generally they're coping pretty well. Gatwick has been surprisingly good in terms of the way that border force has been for passengers arriving there. Yes, obviously capacity is going to ramp up, so that's a concern, but we're seeing sort of 100% OTP at Gatwick at the moment, which for an airport that big is phenomenal. But to Martin's point, ATC and normally being the biggest cause of delays isn't the cause of delays at the moment. It's paperwork checks on departure and all the work airlines now have to do because the pressure's put on them to do all of that those pre-departure checks. But we do have this unusual challenge at the moment of landing early quite a lot, and then that obviously from a slot perspective isn't great. So I think it's the only time you'd ever say you don't want to be landing too early all the time, because it damages your slot portfolio that way. You can be too early as it can be too late. So that's an unusual challenge at the moment. I'm sure as we ramp up through the summer and air traffic builds, and that will be less of an issue, but that's an interesting one that we've never experienced before. But yeah, I think it's the amount of pressure that governments put on the airlines to do all the paperwork checks and so on at the gates, and the fines that are now being levied, and the risk of doubling those fines and so on that are coming online, that I think it puts unreasonable stress on the gate staff and the airlines to be able to do all those pre-departure checks. So obviously we're looking at developing how much can we do before the customer gets to the airport and be able to verify that way. But I think that's more of the challenge at the moment that we're seeing than arrivals and border force, touch wood.
And Jonathan, what's your experience?
Yeah, it's tough going, and I think Heathrow's been relatively good, but I think what you're also seeing is this effect where, as a customer, when you're flying right now, which I do pretty regularly and have done right the way since right the way through the pandemic, that it is almost like you're treading into a forbidden place where nobody should be when you're going into an airport at the moment, because everything's closed around you, and from a customer's point of view, it really feels as though traveling's not normal at the moment. And to an extent, that's a good thing because there are a lot of additional processes. But it's how that whole infrastructure that supports the airlines and the operational stuff, and also the revenue streams for the airports, really crucially, how that's going to get back on track. And you can go through some of the smaller airports, and literally, the concessionaires have actually gone. They've packed up shop and aren't coming back. And that, from a revenue stream for those airports, is going to be a challenge that I am fearful that their problem may become our problem in terms of airport charging and the viability of the airports as we go. But I think in the very short term, there's this question of getting it to a place where, at least as a customer, you don't feel like you're sort of straying into some sort of forbidden off-limits place where you really shouldn't be just by walking through an airport front door. And there are a number of times at large and small airports where I really have felt that. I thought, oh dear, I'm not sure I like this very much. So we've got a job to do as an industry around that. But if there's going to be nobody's used the phrase yet, so I'll use it, new normal in terms of what an airport experience is going to be like, the sooner we can get through to that, to establish that with the customer and reassure them that it actually it's okay to fly, I think would be very, very helpful indeed.
And obviously we spoke a lot about the pandemic, and for obvious reasons, tying into one of the questions from the audience, because certainly pre-pandemic, people were probably one of the biggest factors impacting network and network decisions would be around sustainability, especially in Europe, where we're seeing that's moved so far up the political agenda, and we're seeing it in terms of certainly on governments' radars, and seeing it in terms of a lot of interest in changing consumer behaviour, and also in taxation and so forth. Jonathan, you operate a number of very short flights, I guess, and within that, and that's an area where people are, there's a focus in terms of should they be flights. In many cases, I guess they're over water, but there's not too much options. But how do you see that environmental side of things affecting you operationally, and also customer demand?
Well, we think it's going to be, it was already rising to the top of the aviation agenda before the pandemic. It will be back there again very quickly, and you can already see that moving. So it's with that in mind that we announced a Green Skies program, as we've termed it, about 2 months ago. It went live at the beginning of this month. And that's saying we get to a position of being carbon neutral by 2040. We're going to do that through a combination of technologies. And I'm pleased to see that next week, the first electrical powered aircraft is going to be arriving up in Kirkwall in the Orkney Islands for flight testing over the same routes that we fly commercially within the Orkney Islands, and hydrogen powered flight to follow that. So it's going to take a while for that technology to scale up to work across the whole regional airline route network. And in the meantime, then we've put in a carbon offset program, and we've actually put a pound charge into every ticket to do that to our customers. To actually say, right, this is part of the journey that we're going on, and relate the economic cost of flying to the environmental cost of flying, and start to form that link. And the reception to that's been very, very good politically and from a customer's point of view. I think we've had one complaint from one customer who wrote to me to say, this is terrible, you're enforcing your beliefs on other people. And I wrote back and said, well, yes, we are. I think from that perspective, it's worked out, the reaction to that from a customer's perspective has been really strong, and I'm very heartened by that. So, look, we've put a set of measures in place. We thought long and hard about it during some of the time for reflection that we've had over the course of the pandemic, to actually sort of take this away, have a look at where we really want to go with it, put that into place. So I'm very pleased that we have, and I think the steps that we've taken will provide good reassurance to customers, because a lot of our routes do cross water. But even on the routes that don't, there's a lot of long domestic routes, Edinburgh to Exeter, Glasgow to Southampton, these kind of things, where the road or rail journeys are incredibly long. And also in a number of these cases, particularly where you've got a significant amount of diesel rolling stock still on the cross-country basis, or you're looking at ferries, the environmental force of land transport or surface transport ain't great, despite some of what the rail lobby will tell you. You know, they don't have super electric trains running up and down every route across the country. It's about half the track miles are still running on diesel. And so in those areas, we can make a real difference.
And Sophie, how big an issue is it in terms of Easyjet's network planning thinking?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our network plan, it's not a big challenge for us because we typically don't operate very short domestics. I mean, similar as Jonathan referred to, the ones that only make sense when we're doing our network planning are ones where you don't have a train that you can travel on with less than 3 hours as our general rule of thumb. So, you know, the fact that the French government imposed this rule that any domestic sectors that had a train equivalent of 2.5 hours or less were going to be banned in terms of air operation isn't an issue. I think our shortest sector in France is 3.5 hours train equivalent. So normally we're looking at a 3.5-4 hour train equivalent minimum when we're even assessing routes, because we do recognise that train is a competitor to us, and so that's where we pick that. I mean, in terms of what we're doing, obviously our forwards order book is all neo engines, which are much more fuel efficient. We also fully carbon offset. It used to be that you had to tick a box to do it, but we are the first airline that completely offsets everything. I think we need to do more to communicate that, to let customers know that's what we're doing. And I think that's really important. But at the same time, it's all very well, exactly as Jonathan said, looking at what we do for carbon offsetting in the short term, but it's about how we're supporting investing and working with Airbus and other partners to look at those longer term solutions that can be viable on an aircraft size, the sort that we operate, to be that alternative of the future, and work in partnership with those tech and engineering companies to really develop that roadmap. And that's really important for us as well.
Yeah, and Martin, I guess one of the byproducts of the crisis has been that you've renewed your fleet ahead of time, haven't you?
We have the youngest fleet in Europe now, because we have only the A220, which is it's supposed to be the greenest aircraft. If you look at it, it's a new design, and we have the same engines than the new Neos have. So we've done a big step there, a 20% reduction on emissions. But I always said when that crisis started, and we were always talking about the crisis, and I still maintain that, we all have no idea how much pressure is going to be on us to go much faster than what the current target of 2050 is as airlines, because the generations coming, they will not forgive, and they will be having much stronger voices. And the people today who are taking decisions for the future will have to address that, and they will have to address it faster than we think at the moment. And we will be driven as an industry, because we are still having a lot of emissions which we cannot change because of technology not being available yet, and it's still years away. So there will be all other things coming which we are discussing, and we will all have to implement it once this crisis is over faster, and similar to Easyjet. And there is a lot of planning in the background to make that the subject. The customers will demand that we do these things, because you see it now, if you look at all this, all the flooding and all these things happening in the different countries, how much attention compared to COVID that gets now. And there you get a glimpse of what will happen once that crisis is over and we're coming back, economies are recovering. Then the focus will be on that and nothing else than that for years to come. So I guess our industry always there in the focus if it is about emissions, and we will be able to do it, but we will do it faster than we think today. And at least in airBaltic, we've taken with our green tails and that aircraft a good step forward, but of course there's much more to come.
Excellent. We have run out of time, amazingly. It's shot by. It's been absolute. We got through half of what I was going to talk about. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I think it's been really interesting hearing from people who are sort of at the coalface, really, because these are fascinating times. I think people will ever kind of appreciate the kind of decisions that people are having to go through and the work that people are having to go through. It's been really, really interesting. I'd just like to thank all our panelists, Martin, Sophie and Jonathan, for your time today. Best of luck for what promises to be a challenging summer and probably an even more challenging winter. Big thank you to Sabira and Murdo for all their work behind the scenes on making this webinar happen. And that's it for today. So thank you everyone for your time, and we'll see you again soon.